Hi, and welcome to this brief introduction to how to read Vivien Burr's What is Discourse? I'm only going to take you through the first 2 pages, and you can pause me at any time. And what I'd like you to actually do is as soon as I'm finished speaking, pause me and read the this slide, please, because this is the best way to get the most out of this slide. Okay. So I'd like you to be following along with me, and hopefully you had paused me and you have read at least to page 14. So in the very first paragraph, Burr makes a distinction between how discourse is used in discursive psychology versus what she calls macro-social constructionism. All right, so she's throwing around these big terms, and we're actually in chapter 4 of her book, so you should be able to tell that you probably don't need to be able to define these terms other than to know they exist and that they see discourse differently. But what you do need to know is that the position she's going to take in this chapter is a macro-social constructionist view, meaning she's going to introduce us to how macro-social constructionists understand the idea of discourse. She is also going to link macro-social constructionism with Michel Foucault, who's a French thinker, and she's going to call it a Foucauldian approach. So these two things wind up almost being synonymous with each other, or you can say that Foucault influences macro-social constructionism according to Vivien Burr. Okay? All right. So let's talk about this Foucauldian approach in terms of discourse. So I'm still kind of on page 12, and I'm still on page 12, actually. So the first thing she's going to do is she's going to show you that according to discursive psychologists, they locate most discourse within language. Foucault says, yeah, discourse can function through language, but it also functions through practice, behaviors, things we do, social institutions. So that's, he's adding something. He's going a little bit further. And I know this can be very, very abstract, right? Social practices. We're going to try to give you some examples, but you can probably think about some social practices that we engage in on a daily basis. Okay, now the green part of the hierarchy. This is what's really important. And this is connected to some background knowledge, but you could still get it without the background knowledge. Foucault and a lot of thinkers in the late 20th century, they start to rebel against this idea that I am a subject. I basically make decisions very, very freely. I have thoughts of my own. And it's not that they would reject all of that. What they actually see is just like a fish is born into water and maybe doesn't even understand or know that it's in water, and that water sets limits and its biology sets limits on what it can do, so most fish can't actually come on shore and hang out with us. They see discourse, both in language and practice, as setting limits on us. So you might be thinking, limits on what? Well, limits on actually what we think about, what we can imagine, and limits on what we do. Now, are they trying to say that discourses completely curtail any original thought or any change? Not really, but they are going to challenge what original thought actually is and what free action actually is. Okay, but that's for a later time. So basically what they're trying to say is that just like a shepherd guides the sheep, discourse functions almost like a shepherd. It guides our thoughts and our actions. And it also allows us, it basically regulates our behavior. Now, some of this is like common sense. And by the way, a lot of this thought has already trickled down to us. So part of the seminar is to kind of show you, hey, where did these ideas come from that we have? So this regulation, like what we can do and what can be done to us, discourse sets parameters around that. So for instance, I don't let just anybody ask me to open my mouth and then put a sharp object into my mouth. But I let my dentist do that, right? I don't let anyone poke me with a needle and draw my blood. I let my doctor do that, right? Well, and by the way, if I was going to a new doctor, I would make sure that that doctor actually had a degree in medicine. So those are some of the social practices we're talking about. And that allows doctors to do certain things to us that we probably wouldn't allow anybody else to do to us. Sounds commonsensical, sure. But again, we're trying to actually understand our social life, our social existence. Another analogy to possibly help you with this is our experience of physical reality, right? So here's a little nature scene for you. Now, this scene, how we experience the world, is mediated through our senses, right? So basically, our senses, the way our biology works, enables us to see this image in a certain way. Do we ever actually get reality unmediated from our senses? No. Reality is always, whatever you look at, smell, hear, is always mediated by the senses. It's almost like the senses are a middle person. Remember the Christian reading from the summer? Right? So that's in some ways how discourses work. They mediate our experience. Okay. On page 12 to page 13, she says something really important. She basically says that her point here, one of her points, an important objective, is to show how discourse is connected to social structures and social practices. So that's an important thing to have in your notes or to highlight. Okay. Now on page 13, I'm using the numbers at the bottom. It would be page 64 on the top. She is going to introduce us to Foucault's definition, his somewhat circular definition of discourse. And what you're going to see is that Foucauldian thought is often challenging our commonsensical views. Not always, but oftentimes. So this idea that practices form the objects of what they speak. What the hell does that mean? All right. So first thing I want you to do is think about discourses as having certain abilities. All right. Just like birds have the ability to fly, right? Salmon have the ability to swim upstream. So forming objects. All right. This is going against common sense because we usually think that objects are formed through some type of biological process. Is Foucault denying that? No, he is not denying that. He is simply saying that the biological reality of an event, remember she uses event, person, right? Ideas, are not in themselves almost as important to us as the versions and the way we interpret those objects, people, and events. All right, so this still sounds abstract, right? Let me give you an example. Foucault focused a lot on human sexuality. Okay, look at this scene. Okay, two human females embracing and about to kiss romantically. Okay, that's a description of an event, an object, right? We can possibly even say these two women are lesbians or are bisexual. Okay, we're describing an event. Is Foucault trying to say discourse creates the kiss? No. What he's trying to say is think about all the alternative versions that a cultural group, that people in a specific cultural group will generate and produce when looking at this. And the other thing he's trying to say is just like fish are in water, we are in a water of discourses that give us kind of like a menu of available discourses by which we interpret this. So we might say things like, love is love, right? We might talk about equal rights for all people. Those are discourses connected to human sexual identity in the 21st century Western world. A deeply religious person, either in the United States or in other parts of the world, may see this as sinful. The other thing that Burr is trying to say is that people who are using the available discourses at their disposal to interpret and come up with a version of what this event is, oftentimes think they are describing the reality, the truth of the event. Sinful, beautiful, natural, unnatural, right? That somehow we are And what Foucault is actually getting at, and by the way, Foucault was gay himself and died of AIDS. Foucault is challenging us to know, to really think about, how do we know what the truth of this event is? How can we ever discover the truth? Is it like trying to discover what reality is unmediated by our senses? So that's basically an intro to those first few pages of Foucault. 10 minutes on 2 pages. This reading is really, really rich. I hope this helped you understand. If you have questions about this, feel free to throw me an email.